Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Caroline Baum, and I'm one of the ambassadors for the Older Women's Network in New South Wales. And it is my great pleasure to be with you this afternoon after a very long gap on Zoom, actually, with Donna Ward in conversation about her book, She I Dare Not Name, which is well, it's remarkable in lots of ways. We'll come to that in a moment. I'd just like to start while you're getting comfortable, while you're still kind of getting into the room and settling down. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm on. I'm on Dharawal country on the south coast of New South Wales, which is the traditional home of the Wadi Wadi people. And I would like to pay my respects to any elders who are present today and any Aboriginal people who are here today, and also pay my respects to elders and storytellers from the past, because of course this is a continuous storytelling tradition that is such a remarkable heritage to have and to be aware of. This is really meant to be an interactive and participatory session. So I would love it if you would post your comments and questions. You can post comments if you want to in the chat part of this platform. But if you've got a question for Donna, and we're going to leave plenty of time for questions, put that in the Q&A. And you can put that in at any point. Don't wait until the last 15 minutes of a session, which is what you would do if we were live in a room in front of you at a writers' festival. Just drop the question when it occurs to you, and I may come to it at some point in the conversation. So, as I said, Donna is a writer who has been many other things. She's been a social worker, she's been a therapist, she's been a publisher. So she's got quite an interesting mix of life experience. She comes from Perth, but she lives currently in Melbourne. And in She I Dare Not Name, she tells the story of her experience of life as a spinster. And she explores that status from every angle in our society. And I found the book achingly honest, sometimes terribly vulnerable and intimate and revealing, but it's also funny and poetic, and at times it's quite angry. Donna, welcome.
Thank you, Caroline. It's great to be here. And can I also acknowledge the the First Nations people of where I'm coming from, Melbourne, Naarm, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects also to their elders past, present and future. And if I might say, in these troubled times, I for one will be voting yes.
Well, that's very nice to hear, because I would like to echo that and say I too will be voting yes. And I think that the yes vote is a vote that will be finding a great deal of sympathy within the Older Women's Network community. So thank you for mentioning that. These are very troubling times and very polarizing times. So it's nice, at least today, to feel united with you on that front. There are so many things to ask you about this book. Now, I just want to start by saying that this is not a sort of cultural history of spinsterhood, but the word spinster has a particular historic origin and meaning. And I just wonder whether you might like to refresh our memories about the English word and its origin. And also, I'm wondering whether you did look around in other languages and see what other words there were for this particular situation.
Yes. The word spinster, the English word spinster, was coined in the 1600s, around that time. And it was a word that described the profession of a certain kind of woman who spun for a living. There were also lace makers and candlestick makers, and I don't know whether they were called candlesters or waxters or something like that. But I was particularly interested in the word spinster. And I'm kind of interested in the word spinster anyhow, and how it's kind of gained some dominance, because it is spinning, and the art of spinning is associated with the goddess Athena, and actually who is a late addition, if you like, of the Stone Age goddess. That whole idea of weaving and spinning life into being is a very ancient feminine kind of understanding. So it's curious to me that that is the word that got traction around single women without children. It was at first it was very positive, and spinsters were considered very beautiful and valuable women because they earned a living, and they were not yet married in many ways, but they earned a good living spinning. And so if you got a spinster, you were set for life. It wasn't until they started creating dictionaries that the dictionary makers wanted to identify this kind of social position, if you like, of being not yet married, or not, well, it was not yet married there. We'd say not yet coupled today. But yeah, spinster was the feminine name that they used, and bachelor, of course, was the masculine name that they used. And these words didn't have, in the early 1600s, this is when Queen Elizabeth's alive, they didn't have the kind of opprobrium that we have put on them today. And it wasn't until after she died that a kind of, and spinsters and bachelors were becoming older and seen to be a burden on their relatives and on the system, that the stigma began to attach itself. Because of course Queen Elizabeth was what you might call a spinster. And she was definitely a spinster, actually. She had romantic relationships but never married and never had children, and so that's kind of the ultimate definition of a spinster. So there wasn't that kind of stigma around until later. I did look at other languages. Femme sole is the French word, and I'm just going to have a major seniors moment and not remember the Italian one, but because the only Italian word that's leaping into my head is faggot, but that's not I'm sorry, but that's not that's how my life goes, and that's not the word that we're looking at, but there are Italian words as well. Femme covert and femme sole are the French understandings, and they're relating to whether or not you're owned by a man or not. So yeah, so that was some of the research I did.
That's interesting. Now, I wanted to ask you, the book came out in 2020 and then COVID hit. And of course, you in Melbourne were particularly affected by that. You had the worst of it. And so given that your book kind of went into this vortex, how did you navigate that? Because it must have been intensely frustrating. In a way, there was a spike in reading and we were all at home with, much less to do. And so books were even more important in our lives. And I'm sure that people who are in this Zoom now can see that both Donna and I have got a lot of books behind us. We're both great readers, obviously. But how did you navigate that? Was there a particular kind of disappointment that came with not being able to go out into the world with the book?
Look, I have to say, I was just extremely lucky because we launched on the 3rd of March. And yeah. So the vast majority of my live performance, because you do your live stuff in the first 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So it was, I was in Brisbane, I think it was around the 14th. Yeah, so 2 weeks. It might have been a little bit, it was around the 14th. I'm not going to remember exactly, but it was just as Tom Hanks had been diagnosed, and it was the day I was in Brisbane. I was leaving Brisbane the day that Peter Dutton went into hospital, literally down the road from me, and I just thought, I can't push it any further. I've seriously got to get home. But then I just do feel very privileged and very lucky with this book, because it was almost immediately that Readings, who had already, they launched the book for me. Readings,
independent bookseller in Melbourne.
yeah. I just can't imagine that anyone in Australia wouldn't know what Readings is, but it's a very major bookshop here. But they had launched it for me, but literally within that week after I got back from Brisbane, I received a call to do a Zoom, interview for Readings, and I was there for, I think I was their first Zoom person, and that's what kind of happened. Everything just kind of,
It did.
it felt a bit like, I had a friend decades and decades ago, tiny little bird of a woman, Welsh, and she had twins in about half an hour. Two babies just came out. She was bruised right up to her waist, and it felt a bit like that to me. It was almost like, oh, I'm going to walk into nothingness, and suddenly there were just all these newfangled events, technology coming out of my ears, trying to figure out all these things. Do I buy Zoom? Can I get away without it? All of these sorts of things. Is Zoom safe? Remember?
Yes.
Was the Chinese government going to get Zoom?
Yeah, all of that. So
Yeah.
do you think, Donna, that your single status gave you extra resilience to cope with lockdown?
Oh, look, I wish it had. I assumed that it had. I thought, I can remember writing, and someone had asked me to write about the book, and I can remember, and spinsterhood and lockdown, and I can remember writing the line, I have solitude for breakfast. This will be a walk in the park. Not so. Not so. I mean, it wasn't dreadful. And I thank God every day I didn't have children coming home from school with the virus, or an errant partner who decided that, he was an anti-vaxxer, or I just, thank God for those blessings. I certainly think I could have gone crazy trying to manage an entire life, including domestic and professional life, within closed doors, only allowed to get out for, whatever it was, 20 minutes of exercise. But there was a whole set of other things that happened that I really did think that I could anticipate, but I hadn't. And if I hadn't had a life that was full of self-reflection and understanding, and hadn't had a life that had already been marginalised and stigmatised in many ways, that had brought me to a position where I can reflect on life and accept what it is, I think it would have been very frightening. And I think, the first thing that occurred was a kind of, I almost can't explain it still. It was as if my skin left my body and expanded to the edge of the house, and that this house was me, and there was no boundary, even though I had 24/7 renovations going on next door that, knocking on the boundary and telling me exactly where I belong. I still had this very strange kind of experience of an expanded personal boundary, so much so that when a tradie had to come in to fix some plumbing, when he left, I felt physically violated, as if I had been abused.
That's so intense and so peculiar.
Yes, it was, and it was peculiar. And if I hadn't actually experienced abuse and violence in my life, I wouldn't have been able to have the words or the capacity to really deal with that. So for that, I'm very good. We need to be grateful for everything in our lives. So it's good to have bad events, because when something curious like that happens again. The other thing that I didn't expect was the brain fog, or I don't think we've got a proper English word for it yet. But it was difficult to know if it was because I'm aging. It was difficult to know if it was my natural cognitive decline, or whether it was a lockdown, an effect of lockdown, incarceration, really.
Well, it could have been a sort of a strange combination of hormones and isolation. I mean, we don't know what the combination of, I don't know, a sort of surge of a particular hormone and an intense experience of solitude, enforced solitude, would do. But given that everything about the mind and the body now we understand is so much more connected, you know, that doesn't sound impossible to me. I want to get to the nub of the book because there's a sentence or a comment that you make towards the end of the book that I think really sums up everything that you've been exploring and investigating in yourself in this very, very searching book. And it's I just want to read this quote and ask you to comment on this. You write, "It seems a human right as basic as the right to breathe, that everyone has at least one person dedicated to them, a person who would be so distracted by grief they might not survive their loved one's passing. Yet here I am, personless in this world." That's a very, very poignant admission. And that word personless is so stark. And yet I'm sure that there are many people in today's forum who absolutely relate to that, and to that sense, particularly that if you are single, and you are an older woman, you disappear. And I guess I wanted you to expand on that quote, but also I wanted you to think about it in relation to older women. And I wanted to know whether, in thinking as deeply as you have about these things, you think that there is a parallel between the way we treat spinsters, single women, and the way we treat older women.
Yeah, I do think there are parallels. I do think there are parallels, but I also think it's a kind of double layer of stigma and prejudice, if you like. So I think that so if I can just backtrack a bit, Bella DiPolo, who is a world-renowned author on the issue of singlehood, coined a term called singleism to identify the stigma and prejudice experienced by people who never marry and never have children in particular. So when you think about singleism, there is a kind of set of experiences that can also be applied to ageism, and can also be applied to being a woman. So I feel that there are parallels in that I do receive or have experiences of being patronised. But the way I'm patronised when I'm being patronised as a single woman, when I was younger, and even now, are different to the patronising that comes with age. And I'll just give you a little example.
Please do.
When I was young, let's say 40s, 50s, if I had a physical illness like menopause or something like that, I was often treated by people who were my age, and I was treated as an equal. During lockdown, as you do, I tripped at the shops and fractured my fifth metatarsal in a perfectly safe place. Most people would just keep walking. Anyhow, I figured out I'd fractured my bone, and because I'm old, I was frightened that I'd end up a cripple with a club foot or something like that. And so I went to hospital. Of course, I just had a slight fracture, and I said, "Oh, can we just put a bandage on it?" And they said, "No, you have to have a moon boot and you have to have crutches." And I thought, moon boot felt, like that's what happens when you really shouldn't put weight on a foot. But anyhow, they put this moon boot on me. And then the doctor came in, and a young 28-year-old, I would say, comes in all very confident with himself. And he says, "Okay, I need to give you an injection of warfarin." And I said, "Why do you need to do that?" And he said, "Because you're overweight and you're over 65. I said, "I'm not having, and you have a moon boot on your foot." And I said, "Well, first of all, take the moon boot off And second of all, I'm not having warfarin in my system. I'm not going to complicate this with a brain bleed or whatever else can happen as a side effect of warfarin. I'd rather, you know, sit on a bed for 6 weeks and not move. And he said, I can't let you out of here unless I give you warfarin, and you have to learn how to inject yourself with warfarin for the next 2 weeks. I said, I'm so sorry to disappoint you. That's not going to happen. He said, you should think yourself lucky. In the olden days, he said, they used to put plaster on this, and you would have had plaster above your knee and below your foot. And I just turned on him, look, feeling spunky and, you know, vibrant. I turned on him and said, what makes you think I haven't had a broken leg in my life? What makes you think I haven't had plaster on my leg? And furthermore, it would be the joint above and the joint below, so that wouldn't get anywhere near my knee. And he just looked at me and I looked at him, and he said, would you like a script for warfarin? I said, yeah, you give me that script. So to me, that was the ageism. You know, I was old. He had boxes to tick. Old women who are overweight and have a moon boot have to have warfarin. That's the set of rules. If I was in my 40s or 50s, I wouldn't have been over 65 or whatever it was. I wouldn't have been quite as overweight as I am, because of course we just collect weight as we go along. And you know, I probably would have had plaster because moon boots are a recent thing. But there's all these sorts of ways in which that patronising attitude has to do with age. Whereas when I was patronised, or when I am patronised as a single woman, it's, oh, you've got all that solitude, wish I had the solitude. Oh, you don't know what you want in your life. Why would you want a husband? They're terrible. You know, and apparently children are awful as well.
It's funny, isn't it, the way people dispense these comments to you so liberally, and they don't keep them to themselves. I found that, you know, the status that I can relate to most closely is obviously my own experience as an only child. People will say things to an only child like it's absolutely open season. So you say you're an only child and people feel free to say, oh, well, you must have been spoilt rotten.
Yes.
Or I bet you're terrible at sharing. Now, if I'd introduced myself to someone as a middle child or as a last child, no one would pass those kinds of judgments or make those sorts of assumptions about me and actually articulate them to my face. And I feel like you, as a single person, it's also kind of open slather on saying anything to your face about, oh, well, you know, you've got all this disposable time and you must have so much more space and so much more money and so much more. These assumptions, they're just voiced, and they come across sometimes as so misconceived and so hurtful, of course.
Yes.
Just to go back to the whole moon boot story and what we were saying before about your sense that your skin sort of expanded to the size of the room during lockdown, which is such a weird image. How much research is there on single women in relation to health and mental health worldwide? Have you got any kind of sense of how much single women have been studied?
Yes, the sense is that not very much. There's Bella DePaula is probably the foremost person. Certainly she's focused on happiness and well-being, and that constant compare and contrast between single people and couple people, families, and who's happier and healthier and wealthier. There is a substantial body of research, comparative research on the health and well-being of single people versus couples and also families. It's flawed, and that's Bella's main thesis. It's flawed. I discovered that when I was trying to look at it. I kept thinking that just to set the groundwork in distinguishing between single people and married people, which is the main thing. You know, you've got absolutely everyone and their dog in this group of single people, and only married people with children in the married group. So that incredible diversity of singlehood is not really understood and hasn't been really pulled out. There is, though, I have to say, an increasing amount of research that's come, I would say, inspired by Bella's work in many respects, that has come, but also inspired by this, this incredible demographic change that we're going through. Since the 2000s, there has been across economically, I want to say advanced, that's not right, but economically wealthy countries, a rapid increase in the number of people who are either finding themselves single or choosing the single life. And they might be doing that for a whole, some people do choose. Most people, I think, we don't know yet, but most people, I think, find themselves single. But there's a lot of people also making choices about whether or not to have children in a time of climate change. And all of this is coming together in countries where there's the economic resources and potential and passion for individualism and individual human rights. I have to say the fastest growing country, the country with the fastest growing group of people who are choosing not to marry and couple and settle down is India. And you can imagine the kinds of challenges they're having in India. In Australia, we have hardly any research on singlehood whatsoever. In fact, we only have one piece of research that's come out of Sydney University, done by Myra Hamilton, their associate professor, Myra Hamilton, who has looked, and her colleagues, who have looked at the financial insecurity of single older women without children. And she has identified a clear singlehood penalty that applies to us. So in terms of research, it's a growing area. I'm absolutely engaged in this area. I have managed to collect up all the academics, of which there are about 83 to, I don't know, it's growing. We might be at 90. Let's say 90, all come together, have enthusiastically come together, and we're trying to figure out how to create a global organisation. We don't know whether it's an institute or an association for singlehood studies in particular, because
Fantastic.
people coming from it from all sorts of areas. And what has been most remarkable for me is that there's a body of people who are coming to this through relationship studies, because they are seeing increasing numbers of single people, and they are realizing that the relationships that single people have are different. And friendship in particular has not been researched. So I'm very excited. It keeps me awake at night, I have to say, literally, because the meetings have to be at 1 o'clock in the morning sometimes in order to get everybody around the world on the screen at the same time. It's very exciting. But I
want to come back to what you're doing with the reference group, because I love the fact that there has actually been an outcome of the book where you have generated genuine interest and you have gained traction. So we'll come to that in a moment. I've just got to clear my throat because of the wood smoke here at the moment in New South Wales. There's a lot of respiratory problems. I'm terribly sorry. Sorry about that. Now, we've got a lot of comments coming through and I want to share them with you. So comment from Janet Keller. The plight of the young spinster is magnified when she becomes old. Both the health and aged care systems assume everyone is either partnered or has an informal support network. I have neither and find myself slipping through the cracks in both systems. It's terrifying. Both systems need to be redesigned with old women in mind. And she's also got a question for you, Donna. Janet says, I read your book and it really resonated with me. I was annoyed when I read a review from a married/partnered woman who was very negative and dismissive. She epitomized the whole problem. How have reviewers responded to your book?
I'm sorry. I know exactly the review you're talking about.
Of course we do. We only ever remember those.
I had three, I would say, well, one wasn't particularly negative, but she brought up a very negative statement that really got me thinking, which was that I had said in the book that being a spinster is the most difficult thing a woman could ever do. And this reviewer thought that fighting the patriarchy was braver. And it just set me thinking about why she thought that spinsters don't fight the patriarchy, particularly since we might have been choosing against violent, damaging relationships and bringing up to or having children that we don't feel that we have a partner or the resources to raise, let alone, you know, other personal reasons that we might choose not to have children. And so it struck me that there's a mythology that spinsters we're not part of the feminist movement somehow, or that we aren't challenging the heart of patriarchy.
Well, that is so interesting, because I was going to ask you whether you thought that feminists and, what can I call them, non-feminists, responded to your status, responded to your book differently, and you're going straight to that.
Yes, absolutely. I think feminists have. And there is actually, I've discovered with my international adventures, there is a body of work, it's small but growing, a conversation around how feminism has overlooked single women without children and is committed to the idea that that young singlehood is legitimate, is healthy, but continuing singlehood is problematic and probably unnatural.
So do you think that's part of a general kind of prejudice? I'm going to be very, very ageist here. Is that a millennial versus boomer thing, that you're taking up too many resources, you're not sharing your house with other people? What is it?
There is that, but that's not the feminist story. The feminist story is that feminism has been focused so much on motherhood, rightly so, that women are mostly mothers, and so therefore need all sorts of systemic and structural supports to do that. Absolutely on side with that. But what's happened then is that those of us who aren't mothers have slipped off the agenda. And so it's an unexamined, uninterrogated life. And I think there's a sense of defensiveness about it, that it hasn't been examined. And there's a kind of hierarchy of need, you know. So, well, we have to focus on motherhood because women with children are more needy. They have a tougher time of it or whatever. And women who don't have children are all apparently Gloria Steinem. You know, well, we're not.
Let me just go to another assumption then, because this is also something that I think about a lot. Do you think there's an assumption that you are more available for a caring role, if that should be needed by family or friends, by virtue of the fact that you are unattached?
Yes, absolutely. There is an absolute assumption. I've had it in my own personal life where I went to care for my mother who was dying of pancreatic cancer, and my sister said quite blatantly in one of our traumatic moments that I wasn't doing enough because I wasn't also looking after her son. So, and I realized that was just a kind of an automatic sort of knee-jerk, well, not unexamined kind of thing. But there are stories, and certainly Myra Hamilton's work goes to this. There are distinct stories of single women without children who are kind of in this vice, if you like, at work. They're expected to stay late and fill in for parents who need to attend to children, and at home they're asked to care for they're expected to care for the elderly, they're expected to care for nieces and nephews, they're expected to engage in that kind of care work. And yet I was on the radio the other day, and one woman said that she had been looking after I think it was a sibling, but it might have been friends' children, and her friend turned to her and said, "Go and get your own family." So there's a whole set of, it's so messy. It's like a messy bird's nest, all of this. You know, there's so many unexamined, unthought through kind of ideas going on that lead to this stigma and prejudice and this kind of invisible, sticky, invisible space in which we...
which obviously makes some people very uncomfortable. There's so many comments and questions flooding into you, Donna. I just want to share one with you from Viv, who says, I think women are socialized into marriage and partnership and motherhood. What alternative empowering messages can we give to women and girls throughout the life cycle? That's a big one.
Look, where to start? Uh, it's first of all, can I say, it's not just that you're thinking that that's happening, it is absolutely happening. There's a phrase called gender hegemony, and this is where the feminists are having the discussion at the moment. The way in which our culture and feminist thought will encourage young women to be independent and autonomous until a certain age. And then you start with these kind of, well, when are you going to couple and settle down and have children? Or, you know, are you going to? And if you don't, then you must be odd, right? So there is a cultural pressure. But then there's an economic pressure. These days, a very distinct economic pressure that, because quite simply, you can't live in a dual income economy on a single income. And if you're a woman, you're doing that on a gender wage gap. So, you know, on a 14% less. I think that what we need to do, and this is where I'm hoping to talk with Ged Kearney and appropriate politicians. I think we need to get into schools and start having, in those classes where Chanel Contos is having her consent conversations, we need to be also talking about what it is to be a woman, what it is to fall in love. Does it mean that you have to get married? Does it, if you don't want to, if he's a little bit odd, you know, if he's dubious, if he's not looking like a good prospect, do you have to marry him? Do you have to have children? You know, do you really have to? Do you feel you can economically support those children? Do you feel that you can parent on your own? Do you feel that you can go through divorce and separation? They are actually very frequent these days. How are you going to finance that if that's the outcome of this contract that doesn't make it through? We consider business contracts with more, you know, consideration, I'm repeating myself, but with more focus and with more advice from other people than we consider coupling up and having children. And
And do you think, I mean, you're on an absolute roll there, and there's just so much to unpack.
sorry, yes,
Do
I
you
can go
think,
for
Donna, that we ascribe a different status to women who are single post-marriage, who've kind of been through that and are divorced? Do they have a higher status than the spinster who's never got married? And by the way, I think we should also emphasize, for those who haven't read your book yet, that you came very close. You were engaged. There were men in your life that you had relationships with. This is not some ideological stance that you took. You didn't vow a commitment to spinsterhood at the age of, 12 or 17. Your life has been full of relationships. Those relationships have been complicated. They have been messy. They have been ambivalent. Anyway, let's just go back to the divorce versus spinster thing. Can you just say something there?
Yes, it's not just divorce either. Like, so if you've entered a de facto relationship for us in Australia, sure. I'm talking specifically Australian culture. It's different in other countries, especially different in America. But if you
everything's different in America.
Yeah, but I am quite amazed exactly at how different this kind of conversation is in America. But if you have had a significant live-in relationship with another human being, whether it's been certified by the church or whether you're just shacked up together for a significant amount of time, in Australia, you accrue a kind of prestige, it's an entry into full citizenship. It's an acknowledgement of adulthood if those things have happened. Now, I never made it past 2 years with a relationship. I did get engaged. It was brief because I realized that this person, as deeply as I loved him and he loved me, was not going to be there for the hard yards when it came to having children. It was when it came to making sure debts were paid, those sorts of things. I couldn't actually, he was enigmatic, he was just gorgeous, but he was kind of like, white bread calories, delicious, but not going to be there. It's not good for the body. It's not good for the gut. So, but the unique thing was, like, I didn't speak about that relation. Like, it was over, and I got on with life, and I thought I was going to fall in love and marry someone eventually. It was what I wanted to have in my life. But it wasn't until I was in my 50s when I write about this in the book, when I was having, people over for afternoon tea, and I was wearing a necklace that Takao, his name was, who's Japanese, gave me for our engagement, and it was admired by a person at the event. And I said, "Oh yeah, my Japanese fiance gave me that." And like, the entire room's attitude towards me changed because I had been for 5 minutes engaged. And look, it was nice to be suddenly elevated into the sisterhood, or the community somehow.
The club.
Yeah, it was as curious to me as the reviewer who thought that I wasn't fighting the patriarchy. So,
it's so binary, isn't it? It is so damn binary. It is just bizarre how either or everything is. I guess we just long for things to be neatly fitted into boxes, and we need to know where you fit. There's a lot of comments from people who want to know more about this reference group that we've been referring to. And you mentioned Ged Kearney there. So you were at a meeting with Ged Kearney, who of course is the Minister for Health and Aged Care. And this was a meeting last year. And now, as a result of that meeting and having a conversation with her about your book, you are chairing a reference group that she appointed you to. What is your purpose? What is your mission? What are you doing?
Okay, so it's I think actually Jed's the chair, I'll just say that, but I'm the person doing all the work behind it, with her officer, Jason, her electoral officer, Jason, who I just want to put in a plug for. He does the hard yards behind it all. But what we're doing, so this all started because I went to Ged not only with my book, but also with Myra Hamilton's report. And it was the combination, the lived experience of my book and the absolute data, economic data, that really moved Ged powerfully. And when she got into government, she contacted me fairly rapidly and said, she said in our conversation, "We've just launched the childcare package, and every time I got up to the podium, I thought of you." And I said, I reckon that every Australian woman who is single and without children is going to be very happy to know that one politician is thinking of them. And so she invited me to present at a round table where Katie Gallagher was present. And Katie was very, can I just say, she soaked up everything that I had to say and took notes. And I know that this is already starting to have impact in her work. And so the outcome of that meeting, as you say, was to establish a reference group. And the reference group will be meeting on Monday the 3rd in Thornbury Bowls Club.
Well, so that's in Victoria, though.
In Victoria, it's the first one. And what we're doing is we'll be asking people to respond to particular groups, subjects, doing roundtables and sitting down and writing out stories and reflections on health, aging, finance, bias, disaster response, set of topics that we've got set up. We're gathering information to write a report. The reference group will also duplicate itself, so it'll appear in other electorates.
Good.
And also the most amazing thing is that Older Women's Network, UMI, thank you.
Yes, God bless UMI.
has offered to have a national reference group online And we're going to be talking about how to implement that next week, because we need to get this information from everywhere in Australia.
And so, I think, you know, there's been quite a lot of comments in the chat, Donna, about how to build momentum around this. And someone said, obviously, spinsters have very polite and nuanced conversations. I think they mean the conversation between you and I. But are there any lessons learned from things like the March for Justice? So I think that person is wanting to know that there can be some political grunt and momentum behind this. And of course, in order to do that, we have to form coalitions with other organizations, with other bodies of women who are fighting on all fronts to do with dignity, agency, and social justice, no matter how old you are. But I mean, there are lots of organizations doing that. And so presumably we're going to have to form a coalition of the willing.
I agree. And I'm not up to that yet, because I feel like I'm kind of doing everything. But so it's one little step at a time, because I'm also trying to write my own other book, you know.
What do you mean? Hang on. What other book?
I'm writing another book.
Okay, but it's got nothing to do with this.
Oh, look, I think it is. I think it has, but it's not so focused on spinsterhood as She I Dare Not Name. It's more focused on other things. But
well, we'll have you back for that one. But I just want you to move to a slightly different key or register, if you like, of your book, because your book is like a sort of many tentacled octopus. It goes in so many different directions. And I think you have some very profound, very poetic observations to make about your experience of friendship, and both the well-intentioned friends, the ones who sincerely and genuinely get it and get you, and the ones who are trying their best, but they make these terrible sort of faux pas, like buying you a single person frying pan because they've kind of assumed that, you know, you're not going to be cooking dinner for two anytime in the foreseeable future. And you say something lovely. You say that being single is an artistic blend of friendship and solitude. And I wondered whether you could expand on friendship in the life of the spinster. We've talked a little bit about the solitude, but maybe some pointers about the sorts of things that you've observed that friends get right and get wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, friendship is obviously very important to you, and I would imagine that it is very important to a lot of single people in a particular way.
I think friendship's such a, it is important because it is actually the only relationship I have now. And that's not true for everyone. There are many vibrant older women who are having romantic relationships, and there are also many single women who have family relatives around in their lives, and work relationships and things like that. But for me, the most intimate relationship that I have is friendship. And I've been thinking, like, friends can get it right and friends can get it wrong. I think that's true of any kind of relationship, really. You know, people get things right and get it wrong. It's rare to find a person that gets you anyhow. I think the assumption, the social assumption that friends can step in and provide informal support in a way that a family member is obligated to and has the responsibility to, even if they don't do it well, or if they don't do it at all. At least you can yell at them for that. But you cannot expect a friend or a neighbour to take you to hospital when you break your foot, for example. I was lucky I had someone who could do it, but there have been times when I have been blinded with migraines in the street, unable to get home. You know, that I just don't have someone who can drop everything and come and get me. It just doesn't happen. So I think understanding that is also really difficult if you haven't lived that life. And the majority of my friends are coupled and they haven't lived that life. And though they love me dearly, to make that stretch to really understand the practicalities of being single, it is beyond their experience. And perhaps in the same way I don't get coupling and families as well, although there's such a cultural conversation around that. I doubt that there's anything I don't know. Certainly COVID lockdowns, it was all about everyone except me. So I think I kind of...
one of the things that maybe we need to think about as well is the more physical aspect of singledom in terms of touch hunger. So, for example, if you're not in a physical relationship with someone, if you're not having an intimate relationship with someone, I'm not talking about full-blown sex, but any kind of physical caressing, affectionate touching. Should you go out of your way, do you think, to book yourself in for a massage to alleviate that need for touch?
I think massage is good. I've just always had body work of some kind all my life anyhow, not in a response to lack of touch, but just because it's a great allied health mechanism, but treatment. But other things that I have found wonderful when it comes to that is being in the ocean, being in a spa, bubbling spa, that sort of thing. I think, and before COVID, I never really experienced a hunger for touch. It seemed to me that there was always touch around, but when COVID came, I really experienced it then, because we couldn't even hug our friends.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even have a friend in the house, let alone hug me. And it seems that the hugging conversation has changed and the friendship conversation has changed. I'm still trying to get my head around that. Has changed as a result of COVID. Like the distance in time between connecting with friends has elasticized because of COVID. And also, we don't hug as much as we used to anymore because of COVID. I just know our language has changed. COVID has left a scar on our language, our social interaction, our actual literal language. So I'm still getting my head around those ideas, and actually
I think we are all grappling with those things. Donna, Maddie says the event on the 23rd at Thornbury in Victoria, I would like to attend. How do I get an invite? How does one find out about that?
Yes, you can go to my website and send me an email and I'll have you on that. I'll make sure you get the details. But also, I just want to point out
your Donna Ward website address, what it is.
Donna-Ward.com.au.
Okay.
Donna Ward. But you Google Donna Ward or She I Dare Not Name or Spinsters, you'll get that. Yeah, it comes up. But can I just say it's a third. It's Monday, the 3rd of July.
3rd of July.
At 6 p.m. in the evening. It'll go for an hour and a half. I would love everyone to come. And if
that's in Victoria, though. Don't forget that you're speaking now to a New South Wales audience. So we want the same meeting here. We want
let's try and make that happen. Let's make it happen. I would love to do something in New South Wales. Don't quite know how we can do it, but it will need a politician. So let's find a politician to help us.
I suspect that this is something a few teals might be interested in, Now, I want to ask you something else, Donna, that really intrigued me while I was reading your book. How, in the circumstance of being a spinster, does one avoid self-absorption and self-pity, which would be entirely understandable if this is a situation not of your choosing? And how does one turn from focusing inwards on that absence and lack and turn outwards and find reward in focusing on the needs of others? Because I know that this is often prescribed as one of the great solutions for depression, for loneliness, is to go and find other people who, in a way, whose need is greater than your own, and that sort of reorientates and rebalances things. Not everybody can do it. Not everybody has the confidence. Introverts, I think, find these things much more difficult, and I think that COVID has made a lot more of us more introverted. But can you just talk about the balance between being self-absorbed and being outward looking? Because I don't see you as being inward focused entirely. You are in a lot of the book, but your gaze then shifts and opens out.
I'm very glad you said that, because one of the stigmas about being a spinster, of course, is that I am people have said, oh, you must be or assumed that I'm self-absorbed, after I might have spent the evening listening to their problems, by the way. So it is a stigma. It's an imagining that spinsters or people who live alone or have lived the vast majority of their life alone are self-absorbed.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference, I think, between being preoccupied with oneself through a lifetime. There's a difference, and I think that how can I say this? I'm a therapist, and so of course I'm totally self-absorbed, and I'm absorbed with the adventure of being consciousness within flesh. That I'm sorry, that's the way it is. But if I hadn't been absorbed with that all my life, I would not have known and been able to get through the solitude that was imposed on me, the particular type of solitude that was imposed on me during lockdown, without a thought or reflection by government on that. Now, I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying that's how invisible we are. We're not included in public policy. And so, we have to have this kind of resilience. That sort of self-reflection gave me resilience. We have a cultural understanding that women in particular are not allowed to be inwardly focused. They are meant to have children and a partner, and they are meant to be totally focused on them. All power to them if they can do that. But one thing I hear a lot of women complaining about is how they don't get time to know who they are, to be self-absorbed, to be reflective, to find out who they are, until, of course, they're left.
Or widowed.
And then it's like I've spent a lifetime getting to know who I am. So I'm personally very resilient. But if I had a lifetime full of everyone else plus a job, I wouldn't have that resilience that widowhood brings. And that's why we can see that there has been research done that demonstrates that people who are widowed struggle with loneliness and despair and aging in a way that someone who's been single all their life just doesn't, because when you've been single all your life, you've been dealing and learning and accruing resilience in this regard. So I'm not quite sure if I answered your question, but I think that there's a problem with this idea of self-absorption. Self-absorption's not a bad thing.
No, but you see, I think the reason that I responded to your book in a particular way is because only children get called the same thing, that we are ipso facto, because we have grown up by ourselves. It feels like we've had everything our own way and on our own terms. And so we are completely and utterly obsessed with ourselves in a very selfish way. Now, we've got a couple of minutes left. We've got an enormous number of responses on the themes of loneliness, touch hunger, the need for hugs, massage, the subject of burnout. I mean, there's just an absolute avalanche of things coming our way, which shows me how huge the interest in your subject is. So we are going to make this happen. We really are. But I suppose, wearing your therapist hat for a moment, I've had a conversation with a therapist about this recently. Acceptance. Do you think that in writing your book, you came to accept your status as a spinster and in a sense wear it as a badge of pride?
For so long, when I was writing that book, I was calling myself single. And it wasn't until I can't even remember now when I realized that I have to call myself spinster, because single means single mother or someone in between relationships, or I don't know, it doesn't mean spinster. It means a variety of other things. And I thought, I'm going to have to use the word spinster. And I didn't, because you know what it's like, Caroline, when you're writing a book, you're in a cone of silence in a way. And you're in this artistic, creative process, and you think, okay, spinster's the word, right? So you're going to have to go with that, because that just opens up the entire conversation that you're trying to have with your reader.
We've got 1 minute left.
And then the book got published and I had a copy of it, and I was in a cafe and this woman said, "Oh, whose book is that?" I said, "Well, it's mine." And she said, "What's it called?" And I said, "Oh, She I Dare Not Name, as Spinster's Meditations on Life." And I thought, oh my God, fuck me, excuse me. I'm a spinster and I'm saying it in public, and I'm bringing a book out calling myself Spinster. Certainly, I feel resolved and contained in the idea of what my life is. I've become accustomed to the word spinster. I can't say I'm proud of being one thing or the other. I'm very, very impressed with many of the things I've achieved in my life. And I feel like that's the important thing. It's what your life has been.
I would say that this is only just the beginning, that you've started a whole new movement and a whole new chapter, and you've been absolutely wonderful and inspiring today. And I think that everybody who's commented, testifies to the fact that they're really connecting with your words. If you haven't read it yet, strongly, strongly recommend. Donna, thank you so, so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for yours. Thank you for your wonderful questions. Thank you everyone for responding so deeply and richly. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for wonderful questions and comments.